One of the things that I love to do in my spare time is to watch films. My days are often spent searching through Netflix, trying to find something that I haven't seen yet. Superhero movies, comedies, even rom-coms, I love them. But there is one genre I don't really like, and that is horror movies. I just think they're too intense and I can't really handle it. But there's also something else that I've noticed about them. And that's I always find that the person in the film does exactly the opposite to what you think they should actually do. You know, they hear a bang in their house and instead of running away and going to hide, they go exactly towards the noise. And I often find myself wanting to shout at the screen, you know, don't do it, don't go there. It seems really, really obvious to me. And when I read the parable for today, I had the same reaction. You know what the right thing is for the slave to do, and yet we know that he should forgive his debtor, and yet he does the exact opposite. But I wonder how much we are like this man. The parable is a story about forgiveness. Jesus describes this in monetary terms. But it's instigated, isn't it, by the question that Peter asks him, which on the surface of it is a very good question. And I think Peter must have thought that he had this problem sorted. Maybe he was expecting some praise and applause from Jesus on his, super generous suggestion. But Jesus' response was surprising and very, very unexpected. No, you should forgive 70 times 7. And then he tells them this story, this parable. The slave owes 10,000 talents, which was an unthinkable number in their context. It's almost as kind of like referring to someone owing like a million bajillion. It's a number that doesn't really even exist. And here Jesus is making the point that the forgiveness that this slave had received was absurd. It was a debt that he would never have been able to pay back. And then we hear that he is owed 100 denarii by another slave, which probably accounted to about 100 days' pay. A reasonable debt, but much, much smaller than the one that he had just been let off. And we know that the answer is for him to forgive his fellow slave, to forgive him like he has been forgiven. But instead he refuses, and he throws the other slave into jail because of it. And we sit here thinking, what an idiot, why would he do such a thing? But forgiveness is hard, isn't it? We're not just talking about someone bumping into you with their shopping trolley in the supermarket and apologising. We're talking about real hurt, real life situations, where forgiveness is not always the attractive option. But forgiveness is what Jesus calls us to. Not to earn anything, not just to make ourselves feel good, but in response to the forgiveness that we have received. And this was a debt that we would never have been able to pay. But forgiveness is not just for the other person. Forgiveness releases us from the things that bind us, the resentment and the anger that we are holding on to. And what Jesus calls us to is to be people defined by mercy. To show mercy like we have been shown mercy. To love like we have been loved. And one story that I've always felt challenged by in kind of regards to this is the story of Corrie ten Boom. Corrie and her sister Betsy had been in a concentration camp during World War II. And during this time, unfortunately, Betsy, her sister, had actually passed away from the conditions that they were living in. And then a few years later, Corrie had travelled from Holland, where she lived, to Germany to speak in a church. And she was speaking about forgiveness. And it was at the end of this service that one of the guards from the concentration camp that she had been in came up to see her. Although he didn't recognise her, he knew that she had been in the same camp where he had been a guard. And initially he stretched out his hand to ask her for her forgiveness. And to begin with, Corrie talks about how she struggles to take her hand out of her pocket. She knew that she should. She knew that she should forgive him. But in practice, this was a whole lot harder. And she describes asking Jesus to help her. And then this is what she writes as she reflects on the situation. And so woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into the one stretched out to me. And as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulder, raced down my arm, sprang into our joined hands. And then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. And then she said to him, I forgive you, brother, with all my heart. And she writes, I had never known God's love so intently as I did then. I can't imagine what she was feeling, the anger that she would have felt towards this particular guard. And yet through the power and the help of Jesus, she is able to forgive this man who had hurt her so much. And for me, this gives me hope. Hope that I can also forgive when needed. And what Jesus teaches us through this parable is that forgiveness goes beyond numbers, beyond counting. But instead, forgiveness is about our ongoing discipleship. It's a way of life. And so my encouragement to us today is that would we be people who comprehend the mercy that has been given to us so freely by our Father in heaven? And out of that, would we be people who are defined by mercy and demonstrate that to others in the same way? Even in the most difficult times, with the people who don't want to forgive, I pray that we would be people who respond to the forgiveness we have received and forgive others in the same way.